All right, so I'm going to read some short bios, and I think I'll go this way. And as we're getting started, we have a few questions, and what we're going to try to do is have as much of a conversation as possible. Jason and I are going to kind of co-facilitate this, and we'll see how it goes, but I'm really grateful to each of our panelists. I'm going to start with Caenisha Warren. To my right, she is the granddaughter of an African-American pastor from Texas and an immigrant Chinese woman. For 12 years at the John Perkins Center at Seattle Pacific University, she has served young people, the church, and the community. She holds a Master of Arts in Christian Ministry from North Park Theological Seminary and is active in leadership at Quest Church and the Evangelical Covenant Church denomination. So, welcome, Caenisha. Dr. Carl Livingston is a pastor, professor, lawyer, and member of the United Black Christian Clergy. Pastor Livingston leads Kingdom Christian Center in Federal Way, and since 1990 has taught political science at Seattle Central Community College. A gifted teacher and scholar, Pastor Livingston has authored many books, including Shoestrings and Bootstraps, a development plan for Black America. And he is currently writing new works addressing issues of justice in the Black community today. Jevon Washington is a church planter and the lead pastor of Flourish Church right here in Columbia City. He's pursuing a Master of Arts in Social Justice at Kilns College, and hopes to see people and places transformed by the restorative and just gospel of Jesus Christ, and is my former neighbor. So welcome, Jevon. And last but not least, Jason Davison, who some of you know, many of you, is a pastor, former church planner, and educator. He and his wife, Foxy, have served Central and South Seattle since 1998 as mentors, teachers, community leaders, and many more things that I didn't have time to list in local schools. But after recently serving with Seattle's Union Gospel Mission, Jason now serves as assistant pastor at Grace Church Seattle. Jason and Foxy have 3 children, Judah, Zion, and Trinity. So welcome to our whole panel.
So I just want to say, I am not
it.
part of the panel. Okay, we invited guests who have a long and diversified.
You're on it. You're on it, bro.
So I just want to say, so Peter invited us to come, and really I wanted to work with Peter and David to really talk about this reality of fatigue and what it means to be laboring for the Lord, particularly in spheres in dealing with justice and equity. And to run into that sense of fatigue. I think we all, whether we are, really deep in the work or maybe just in some form of ministry or in our jobs or in our relationships, whether you've been married for a long amount of time or you have kids, I think we all know what it's like to have fatigue, right? And specifically within the context of our discussion today, we did want to talk specifically about what it means to be laboring for the Lord in contexts of justice. How can we learn, particularly how can we learn from the Black experience and the diversity of Black leadership locally? How can we navigate that dynamic of fatigue when we want to honor the Lord and serve our neighbors? So that's, again, want to kind of frame the discussion. I don't know if I cut you off, but I just wanted to say that. So we do have just some basic questions for our panelists. We'll try and finish just before noon and then open up for questions that you can ask our guests. So I'm going to just jump in right away with our first question. And again, thank you, each of you, for making the time to come. Caenisha, why don't we start with you? And this is the same question for all 3 of you. Thinking about what we just said, in what ways is your work and ministry currently a response to discerning God's call for your life? Like, in what ways do you see your present work in response to God's call, which calls you deeper into the work of justice?
So what I would say, so I work at Seattle Pacific University, and I've been there for 12 years. It may not look like I've been there for 12 years, but I've been blessed on both sides to look so young. But I would say that if I were to start with my journey, like, I just happened into it. Young people have always been a part of what I do in terms of my adult life and in ministry. But I feel like I can definitely look back and see the ways in which God has prepared me in my prior experiences for where I am today. But recently, I would say I was recently on a panel for admissions at SPU, and they asked in terms of why are you here? Why do you work at SPU? And for the last 12 years, I've had a very honest answer to say I have a love-hate relationship with that place. And large in part because it's predominantly white. It's changed a lot in the last 12 years in terms of its growth, in terms of diversity in students of color, and other areas since I've been there, but it is still predominantly white. And so what I have noticed in my time there, though, has been this gravitational pull of students whose stories do not necessarily fit within the dominant narrative or culture that gravitate towards me, and just in terms of who I am, but what I represent there. And that has come to be a holding place for me in terms of why I'm there. And so my response to the panel was, I'm there to be able to represent and to share into a narrative that may not fit the narrative that we may exist in at SPU. I had the opportunity last year to give the baccalaureate address to the graduating class. It's the final worship service, and I gave the homily. And one of the things I talked about was that challenge of kind of being in this larger narrative when maybe your story and who you are runs counter narrative to that, and the challenges that come to that. But and some of my own story coming out of that, and admitting that after 12 years of being in one place, SPU may not actually be my community. And that's a tough thing to say, because you think after some time and investing in there that you would have community, right? But my challenge to students who have felt that way about their experience, and students that are coming to SPU for sure, is to live boldly into your story and into your narrative so that you can write a more complete, larger narrative and help bring into that more dominant narrative, more counter narrative that has a pulse.
Thank you very much. Dr. Livingston, kind of similarly, the same question. When I think of Dr. Leung's comments about living an integrated faith, you have so many hats as a pastor, a professor, a lawyer.
Well, I have
activist.
a big head.
I mean, how do you see all of those as a response to God's call on your life?
I was called to be an ambassador, and I was called to center that ambassador work in the African American community. So my job as first an attorney was to be a better ambassador of what God, and minister and representative of God. So I took very seriously when it says that I was not just a lawyer, but I was a counselor. Lawyers are counselors too. But I realized I couldn't do that. I couldn't do the work in the community because to be a good litigator, I found it to be 24/7. And I wanted to do bigger things. And then when I started teaching, I really was able to be a better ambassador, a better person centered in the community. Let me take you back really quickly. How'd the ambassador thing come? I told people from the time I got saved in 1973 as a 13, almost 14-year-old, I know that was a long time ago, that I was not going to be a pastor. You know, I'm going to do my work in the community helping pastors. That was my thing. I was an athlete, and I was pretty good at basketball till I tore my ACL a couple times in my junior year of high school, and had to reinvent myself, relearn myself. And I wanted to do whatever God wanted me to do. And so once I got to Oral Roberts University, about that second year, and hearing a pastor from the Caribbean, so powerful, so much like the book of Acts, I was like, man, God, I'd never seen anything like that. And then, so God said, when you didn't want to be a pastor, you were speaking against him too. And I was like, but no, God, I didn't mean to speak against him. I was just saying I didn't want to do that because I saw pastors in a more two-dimensional way. I just didn't see them like athletes, like Christian athletes. I just, I don't know, especially in my community, just driving Cadillacs, kind of a little overweight, not really doing a whole lot of things, but talking really, really well, and a good tune-up, and the offerings. I didn't want to live on offerings, and I'm probably making things bad between me and other pastors with Cadillacs. But, oh man, should I just leave now? Okay, goodbye. So then I said, God, I repent. And then it was in that process of repenting about the second week, because I felt like I had displeased God too, because it's like God said, these pastors are important to me. You talked about all of them. I'm like, how did I talk about it? I just said I didn't want to be, but God is God, So I repented, and then bam, I was walking through the prayer gardens, and I heard a voice. I was a little late. Don't say anything, because he already knows me. He knows me. And I was rushing to class, okay? But I had a suit on and a plastic briefcase, because, all my stuff was from the ghetto. And polyester suit. There was two favorite girls back then, Polly and Esther. And don't say that. Don't say that. And so I was rushing, and then right there in the prayer gardens, bam, I heard the voice said, be my ambassador. I'm going to send you to places great and small. You will be my utility person. And it just burned in my soul. I couldn't wait to get out of class, couldn't wait to call my pastor back here. He said, good son, I knew I was supposed to preach after that. You'll preach. But I didn't want to be a pastor. I just was now going to serve pastors from the pulpit. The next thing that hit me was I was senior year, asked to help start the Christian African American Society. We went and got John Perkins. And John Perkins came, and he spoke, and I was getting ready in my mind. I know God's going to want me to be a missionary in Ukraine or something, and I got to be willing to do it, And John Perkins said, go back home. That's your mission field. And I had my marching orders. Ambassador, send it back home. I'm basically doing that same work now.
What about you, Jevon? I mean, we've been around each other for quite some time, and as a fellow church planner, just seeing how you've gone through different times and seasons where you're trying to figure out what the Lord is doing. How do you get a sense in your story of God's calling? How does that direct your life right at this moment?
Yeah, I would say like one of the last times that I had saw Jason was was it Mobile, Alabama? So I had moved. I'm originally from Washington, but I had moved to Memphis to do like a multi-ethnic pastoral residency. And so I did this residency at this church where it was like black and white. And Memphis is just split pretty much down the middle between black and white. And it was just super crazy because I left this place of multi-ethnicity expression of worship where we had a Colombian worship leader, Asian worship leader. We had, just all these different types of people, guys, girls. And then in school, I'm reading a book called The Last Segregated Hour, which was written by a professor at Rhodes College. And in this book, he talks about how there was a church in our community that during the times of the sit-ins, or there were being like pray-ins, blacks were not allowed to come into that church to fellowship. And so the elders and the deacons would be standing outside blocking black people from coming into the church and then praying and denying them fellowship, denying them church membership. And so there's this iconic picture of these white clergymen standing while these other blacks are standing or kneeling on the ground praying. Well, once certain things changed at this particular church, they were becoming more progressive, is what people were saying, and they let blacks into the church. A whole bunch of people, about 300 of them, were like, we don't want black folk. We don't want to worship with those black people. So we're going to leave and start our own church. So they started their own church called Independent Presbyterian Church. And for some reason, and against a lot of counsel, I became their first black pastoral staff member in over 50 years at their church.
Lord Jesus.
Just like God.
Yeah, it was crazy. And so I was just there, like trying to figure out, people were having weird conversations around me. And it got real to when I realized when two things happened. A group of elders made hats that said, "Make IPC great again," that were all red. And then in an elder meeting, an elder looked at me and he said, "Before we start this meeting, I just want to hear from you. Who's in charge? I want you to tell me who's in charge." And I was like, I don't know who this dude's talking to. Like, and I don't know what happened. I was like, I thought this was a church. And so I realized, like, through just pursuing the call of pastoral ministry was what really led me into this justice piece. I started realizing, like, a lot of church was like, in spheres that I was in were like very unjust when it comes to minorities. And so I saw Jason at Mobile, Alabama, when they did this vote in the Presbyterian Church of whether or not they were going to repent of racism. And I just like, I know in Acts 15, the church had a vote on whether or not Gentiles could be like in the fam. But like to have a group of pastors vote whether or not we're going to like repent of racism, I was just like mind blown. So I knew that I needed to help change those things. And so I have still been on my journey of learning, and I moved back to Seattle. Ended up, David's my neighbor. I'm reading his book. And then like associate SPU. Oh my, he's my neighbor. And so I meet David, and David, he starts talking with me and helping me. No, I didn't do that. I would catch him when he was walking out of his house, and so he couldn't escape. And so I realized that so much from being at this church in the South, and then meeting David and seeing these different things, was I was living this disconnected life of faith or spirituality and justice. So I went through a lot of things. A lot of things have happened recently, but I recently left another church that I was part of to pursue justice, in equity and spirituality all in the same place. And so my current work today for that reason is I work for a nonprofit called Mount Baker Housing Association here in Mount Baker, and we work in affordable housing. So when I think about churches being sustained, I don't want their pastors and the people to have to move. So I want to help people be able to actually have access to affordable housing. So that's what I do during my day job while I'm still seeking to plant a church here in Columbia City, to even go back to my people, the people that I was in a lot of those relationships, the same kind of theological sphere, and say these are not disconnected, these are actually together. So that's what I'm doing now.
I got more questions, but I don't want to let Jason escape. So if I could put you on the spot briefly.
You guys have me here. My wife and I came here last year.
Yeah.
Put us on Front Street. Okay, I'm just here to facilitate. All right.
All right. Can you give us a little bit, just a small window into some of the work you're doing now? To just help us out. Help us out. For those of you who weren't here last year, you haven't met Jason before, and so you'd like to, just a little bit.
So I would say, honestly, the reason I was motivated to come back here is because God has brought me into a season of last year of fatigue. Some similar dynamics that Jevon and I have been in, and that Caenisha, I really want to hear more from you. Similar of just being in a lot of white spaces as the only leader of color, and having to navigate that can wear on your soul. So for almost 20 years now, I've served with different hats in the Central District in South Seattle. My wife and I were tutors, and then we were school teachers, and then I came back and worked with a lot of grassroots organizations because I wanted to have that integrated faith. I wanted to work not in Christian circles. And so I worked with a lot of different people who worked politically downtown, or in different artist groups or activist groups. And so I did a lot of different things, ended up owning a cafe and using the cafe to employ youth in the neighborhood. All of that before planting a church. And so I was in the denomination that Jevon's talking about, where they're debating whether or not racism, we should say we're sorry. And it was at that time that my church plant closed. And I was there to kind of end my business with the denomination at that point. So I've just worn a lot of hats. Just recently spent 2.5 years at Union Gospel Mission, and kind of feeling like, okay, I need to take a step back. So what actually drew me to hear from the three of you is I just wanted to hear practically my second question. Okay, I know I didn't answer your question, but my second question is more about fatigue. You got to help this pastor out. Okay, I'm wondering just how you all in the various roles that you have. And I kind of wanted to start with Caenisha, because you mentioned it a little bit about the 12-year stint and not feeling at home. Like, that wears on your soul, I would imagine, right? I mean, and this isn't meant to be go down the line. We can interrupt each other, but
Can I interrupt this?
yeah.
you did such a great job with this lead-in to this panel. And if I were your student, I would be thankful. And I just wanted you to know you did an excellent job.
Thank you.
I want to thank you so much for being in this institute at SPU, because that man really did change my life, and you're carrying that forward. I just want to thank you all. I'm gonna thank you later on. Okay.
Why don't we?
Yeah, we're gonna get into the fatigue conversation. I hope this is a safe place to do this. You know, there's no reconciliation without the truth, and I think it's really essential for us to be truthful, to be honest, to say like these are things that are frustrating. These are things that have caused discouragement. And so this is not a time of wallowing. I'm not going to lead us into nobody knows the trouble I've seen, but maybe we'll get there. But I think it's important to make space to say, let's be honest. If we're family, let's be truthful about our hurts and our discouragements, because I think that fatigue is very real. And if we're going to persevere, we have to be honest about that fatigue.
Just talking about your experiences, and I'm not trying to throw anybody on the bus. So I don't know if your boss is here or anything like that, but
Even if they were. In my current season, I am definitely tired and have been in a place of, I guess, moving back to restoration and moving back to, I think, pacing myself. And one of the, I think, markers that kind of got me there was not this summer, but last summer, summer 2016. I was invited to do a workshop at the Evangelical Covenant Church's women's conference called Triennial. It happens every 3 years. I don't go to women's conferences. It's not my thing. But was invited to do a workshop on building a multicultural and multi-generational community. And so I went because they were paying me and paying my way. So why not go? But part of the other reason why I went was because they were offering this mini Sankofa. And so the ECC does these spiritual journeys focused on racial reconciliation called the Sankofa, or the Journey to Mosaic. And that's when you're just kind of moving through a region and exploring through the people groups and their history and grappling with that and praying together and looking at realistically at what that looked like. And so the Sankofa is African American specific. You usually go to start in Chicago because that's the ECC headquarters, but and you go through different places in the South looking at history and thinking about what its implications, its impact on today. And so I was interested in this Manny Sankofa because the leaders that were there were some of my great mentors. And at that time, it was actually 10 years since my first Sankofa, which is kind of the start of my formal work and ministry in reconciliation. And so I was excited to kind of be a part of that experience and see how they were going to do this mini Sankofa as part of this conference. And I went on that, and there was parameters around it to which it couldn't be set up in the way that it usually is. And it was just very discouraging and disheartening being in a very, very white space. And we're set up with a partner of a different race, so it's usually a white person and then a person of color, and it was just me having to defend and to validate my own experience as a person of color, as a woman of color, and it just was, I shut down. And luckily, a friend of mine was with me and kind of carried some of that in terms of the conversation. But I just shut down, large in part because it was, I was thinking about, I've been doing work for 10 years to kind of work towards this understanding of reconciliation, working towards helping to bring more awareness, helping to bring together people. And I feel like none of that has been done. Like, here I am on a bus full of people who are at the very beginning, not even started, not even seeing some of the atrocities and the injustices. And it just made me think, why? If I have been laboring for 10 years intentionally in this, and really in actuality all my life as a multiracial being, why? And so I just kind of came away from that really tired. And then to come back to SPU, another white space, just questioning, should I be there? But I see my students, and they remind me in terms of why I'm there. But even at SPU, it's been a long 12 years, and we had a new administration come in recently in the last 6 years, and I feel like we've had to start all over again. And so I feel like each year I am fighting the same battles, and I've been there for 12 years, and it gets a little discouraging. I try to just hunker down into my little world, do my thing with my students and with my community, but it definitely gets to you, and there are some days where I just need to check out, and there's some days where I just need to have closed door conversations. And we, being in the Perkins Center, we tend to be that spot on campus, place of refuge for people, for students, but staff and faculty alike. And I'm grateful for that. And I think that as I describe my experience at SPU, I don't think that I could work in another place, another department at SPU. And I wouldn't be there if it weren't for the center. So.
I really identify with that sense of being put on the spot. It's supposed to be a place of equity and exchange and learning, and then having to defend and explain the realities that are true. And I remember being at the University of Washington College of Education, working on my master's in education, and we were in a multicultural course together, and here are the future teachers for Seattle Public Schools. I'm the only African American out of 60 students. And I'm coming back, we're having a debrief, and you're just hearing these people say, well, I don't understand what's wrong with the black children. I don't understand what's wrong with all these Latinos, and just very hurtful things. And they're supposed to be my future biology teacher, history teacher, and I'm having to explain and defend myself. I'm not in your shoes, but that pain is familiar. I'm wondering, just in terms of either one of you, what are ways that you have or are currently experiencing fatigue, and how are you working through all that?
Yeah, I think this is something that is so important. I met David when I was done, man. I was ready to light stuff on fire at that point. And then, talking with Jason and knowing that in Jason's just experience and him already, seeking to plant churches, and in so much of the world and some of the spheres that I've been in, if you're not a church planter, then you're not considered as important. Or if you're a black church planter, then we can give you money because this is cool. We're doing the black thing. And just seeing that over and over and over, and knowing that's not everybody's intention. So I don't want to paint that picture either. But when you're going through that, it just starts to wear on your soul. You're in churches that don't understand that they have a culture. If you ask a fish, what's it like to live in water? They won't say, what are you talking? They'll say, what are you talking about? Because they don't know what you're talking about, because the context it's different. And so in these contexts, I just felt more and more strain. The more and more I felt like I got to embrace, the more and more I feel like I got to change myself. And when you have a debrief after preaching and people say, you said amen a lot. We think, when we're talking about preaching needs to, and then we can get into these types of ways. And those things started to just murder my soul. they started to murder, say, you can't be who you really are. You can't be who God's made you to be. It's not that improving certain things is not what we want. We want you to look like us, talk like us, dress like us. That got so bad to where I met David, and I ended up actually like leaving church staff, and I went and worked at PCC. I was working bagging groceries, and I was going through intense counseling. I went to therapy with a brother who I found a black therapist, Christian therapist.
Where?
That's what I'm saying, man. Like I was like, it's a unicorn. Like I might as well have found a pot of gold. And he even worked in ministry before. So here again, all my context of everything that I needed to sit down with another African-American man, talk about just childhood things, talk about race things, talk about what it's like to be involved in church ministry. And that was a really healing process. I went to therapy for almost 4 months every single week to talk about those things. And so I would even just say part of what health looks like, I think is knowing your limits. It also made me have to switch schools. I was going to a school from Reformed tradition in wanting to go into the PCA and knowing that all churches weren't like, what we had experienced or have experienced before. But I knew that going to school for 4 years was what I was going to have to do to get my degree and then pass this crazy test, which you're way smarter than me, and that's probably why you passed it. Pass this test after going to school for 4 years. I was like, I don't have that kind of money. I don't really feel like I want to do that. So it even meant me, because I didn't feel like they were going to teach me a certain, aspects of justice. So I even switched my school. I went to a school which people in the spheres that I was in would consider me being more progressive or liberal, but I knew what was the truth of the Bible and what my soul needed. It needed the reality of the gospel of Jesus Christ. It was really good news, not bad news every day. And so going to therapy was life-giving. Leaving the ministry job was absolutely life-giving. And then I think being involved in seeing Rainier Valley and Columbia City and meeting other pastors and other ministry leaders know like there's a whole different world that people and even me built fences. It was like, I'm in this place, you're in that place. And now, by the grace of God, the Lord used all of those things to just smack the whole fence down. And now I'm just like, oh my gosh, I've got so many other siblings of the faith that don't look like me. And then they do look like me and they talk like me. And I'm like, man, this is crazy. And so now I would say that just being able to go through that intense season of therapy and just being able to tell the truth, like you can't have reconciliation without telling the truth. I couldn't have reconciliation with myself without being honest and just telling the truth, that this just wasn't me and I needed to be me and who God's made me.